Good afternoon and welcome to Ask the Doctors on Whitewater Community Television's WGTV Channel 11, WCTV Channel 21, and streaming on Facebook Live. Our doctors, as usual, Dr. David Jetmore, Wayne County Health Officer. Sir, good afternoon.
Good to be here.
And Dr. Thomas Huth, Vice President of Medical Affairs at Reed Health. Once again, good to see you.
Good to see you too.
How's your week been? A lot going on this week, I think.
There's a lot going on.
Lot of, you know, from the time we've started this, it's been weekly updates on various and sundry things. Reed's been busy moving their COVID testing site and vaccinations going on. There was another vaccination clinic, I think, on Wednesday.
Yes, we had 200 doses of Johnson & Johnson vaccine, and we had to have people make appointments for it rather than doing a walk-in clinic. The first clinic, the Saturday before that, we vaccinated 640 people. So we're proud of that. We're having another clinic on April 7th.
Okay.
So people should be cognizant of that. But vaccinations are proceeding.
Will that on the 7th be another Johnson & Johnson, or is you're just vaccinating people as you go?
Well, Christine may call me with some.
Okay.
No, that's not true. But I think it's a Johnson & Johnson vaccine clinic.
Okay. Christine, if you're watching, give us a call. I think you know the number. How are you? 30,000 shot, moving the COVID testing site. It's been a week.
Yeah. That was. We moved the site because we're starting on a construction project where it was. And I think I like the new site better. It's at the bottom of the hill on Chester Boulevard, a little bit more, accessible to folks in the city at least.
Right across from the old Reed Health
Yes.
site, what used to be the hangar building, I think is what it was.
Correct. Yes. Reed owns that building, has for several years. And like I say, I like it there. And basically we're doing all the same testing. So if we need either the PCR or the rapid antigen tests, then those can be done there. That's where we're doing all the pre-op testing as well. And I think that's going really well. And yeah, we had our 30,000th shot this week, and the exact 30,000th person happened to be a young mom from Fort Wayne who couldn't get an appointment near her, and she traveled all the way down here because we had lots of appointment availability. And she brought her husband who had some health issues. They wanted to get vaccinated as soon as they possibly could, and so they came down. I think it was Wednesday, pretty sure was the day. Might have been Tuesday. And had a very interesting story to tell, so we made a little news release out of it.
CDC continues to release some guidelines. Today, travel for people. They're saying most people are used to having to get a COVID test before or after travel or quarantine. They're saying you don't have to do that now unless the particular state that you are traveling into says that you need to do that. So it seems like at least for those people who are getting vaccinated, some of the restrictions are beginning to be lifted. It could be all over soon.
Well, as we spoke earlier, I think obviously one of the great driving forces for getting vaccinated is not getting COVID.
All right.
But if you're around a person who has COVID, you don't have to quarantine for 2 weeks, which is 2 weeks of lost work for people. These travel restrictions, you don't have to quarantine. The CDC says the risk of travel for vaccinated people is very low, so there's no testing.
Yeah,
so that's a good thing.
That's for domestic travel within the United States,
right.
And so basically it's travel as normal.
It's
with
still hard
the
to travel
proviso,
internationally. There's still a lot of places you can't
for
get
international,
into internationally.
They are recommending international travel that you have a test before you go, another test 5 days or so after you come back, but there's no need to quarantine when you come back. And then, of course, whatever requirements may be necessary in the foreign country to travel to, you're going to have to comply with that. But for the domestic portion of it, all the proviso is if you've been vaccinated. Well, that kind of raises the question of, how are you going to, does that set the standard that that there needs to be like proof of that to show to the airline companies or something. They didn't get into that portion, but I do know that the CDC with the FDA are looking at ways to sort of electronically document your vaccination status that can't be forged or lost or whatever. It just would be there. And of course, it gets into this whole discussion of so-called vaccine passports, which again kind of tips over into the political aspects of all this, which I don't really completely understand. I mean, we have to, if you travel to Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, you have to get vaccinated against certain things before you go, and you've got to prove it. You know, so this is not like it's not like we don't have precedents for this. If you're going to go to certain training programs, if you're going to go, enroll in a school places, if you're going to work in healthcare, they're going to require you to be vaccinated against certain diseases and be able to prove it if you've had it previously. So this is not really new in concept, and I personally won't have any problem with doing whatever it takes to verify my vaccination status, and I just don't recommend anybody else worry about that either. So it's not a part of some government plot, as I think some people worry it is, to track and trace people and such like. I always like to say, this is an awful lot of trouble to go to track and trace the American public. Create a pandemic and things that you inject in people, or tracking them through their vaccine passports. All they have to do is follow my cell phone footprint, which they can do today.
Yes, they can.
They didn't need to go to all this trouble. So I don't think we need to worry about this being some huge plot.
And you were talking about this certainly is not without precedent requiring people to be vaccinated. And the way that's controlled, if, for instance, if you're going to Brazil or the Amazon basin, you have to be vaccinated for yellow fever. And if you're not vaccinated for yellow fever, then those countries will not issue you a visa. So you can't visit there. So this has long been done to control the transmission of diseases in areas where these diseases are endemic.
Okay. I'd like to, before we start answering some of the questions from the community, I'd like to go back through maybe a couple of things that we haven't talked about a lot recently that maybe we need to. The governor's mask mandate is going to end on Tuesday. It is still an advisory, I believe, and maybe as our public health officer, you can provide us with a little bit of information as to what that mandate, or what his executive order actually says. I know it says that you don't have to wear a mask. It's an advisory. He's not saying you don't need to wear a mask. You have to wear a mask if you go into a state building. So it's not like you can just go, okay, well, I don't need this anymore, because you are still going to have to wear it in certain instances.
Well, he made exceptions. One of them was for state buildings. People have to wear a mask at a COVID testing site. People have to wear a mask when they're getting vaccinated for COVID. And he kept masking and distancing in place for K through 12 children in school. But he basically said that we no longer have to wear masks. There's no need for social distancing. There's no limits to the capacity of crowds. And this will all take place on April the 6th. And he justified this by saying that our hospital numbers, our positivity rates were all down. I wish he had drawn a different conclusion, which would be our positivity rates and our hospitalizations are down. We must be doing something right. But I'm sure he faces tremendous political pressure. Sure. Because there's a tremendous amount of pushback from people. They're tired of wearing masks. They're tired of social distancing. But right now, Eric, there's a race between us and this virus. This virus is creating increasing numbers of variants, and they're all more infective, they have a higher R0 number. In other words, each person can, typically, when we started out last spring, the average COVID patient would infect 3 other people. Now this R number's gone up with these variants from England, from California, Brazil, South Africa. So that R number is much higher. In fact, people say with this UK variant that the number of people infected will double every 10 days. That's a tremendous growth in numbers, and we're seeing COVID on the rise. It's on the rise in the United States, it's on the rise in Indiana, and it's on the rise globally, in spite of the fact that right now our positivity rate in Indiana is only 4%, which is, when we've looked at 16 to 20%, that's a very low number. Mm-hmm. But we got there because we did all these mitigating factors, plus the effect of vaccination.
Thoughts?
Well, I echo what Dr. Jetmore said. Little concerned about prematurely relaxing the what in the business are called non-pharmacologic interventions, and that's masking, distancing, hand hygiene, and such. And as when we'll see when we get to the numbers, and my concern is that we actually may be on the cusp of a new wave. Dr. Jetmore has referred to the current state as a trough, and I think that's the right way to think about it. We've been in a trough. What trough means there's it's more like a valley where you go down one side and up the other. That's been a dilemma. Have we been in a tail, which means it's going to tail off and go to nothing, or have we been in a valley or a trough where it will go up the other side? And I think the evidence is beginning to mount that we're actually more in the trough, more likely to be in the trough, or beginning to come up the other side of the valley than we were on a tail, unfortunately. And so it just seems funny to kind of be pulling back on common sense public health measures if that's the case.
Okay. The other thing I want to ask about, which we have talked about and heard you talk about, we've heard it some on the national news, monoclonal antibodies. There are still people getting COVID. We're not hearing the numbers on the national news like we used to, but we do still have people dying at a rate of somewhere between 600 and 1,000 people a day nationwide. So this is not over. For those people who choose not to be vaccinated, choose not to wear a mask, and get the virus, has that treatment therapy still shown to be effective in minimizing the effects of the virus for them, and how readily available is it still now?
The answer is yes. Yes, it is helpful, and the other part of your question, is it readily available? Yes. We still have it available to administer. We're not administering anywhere near as much as we used to do. I think we've done 1 treatment this week. I always feel like we should be doing more because we have enough new infections of people who would qualify for the treatment. And we know that if taken very early, like within 3 days of the start of symptoms, is when you get the best impact from it. And that's seen in that period, it seems to reduce the likelihood of progressing to needing hospitalization, reduces by about 70%. And if you avoid the need for hospitalization, then by definition, you're avoiding the risk for death from COVID-19. So we don't use it, have never really used it anywhere near as much as we could, but the volumes of that have been way down, as you would expect if the new cases have been falling off. Mm-hmm. The big change in that area is that the B117 UK variant and for sure the P1 Brazilian variant, which there have been like a handful, but there have been some cases of that identified in Indiana. Those have relative resistance to the bamlanivimab alone. That's the Lilly product. It's single component product, so that there's now a new version of it that's combined with another monoclonal antibody called etesevimab. So that combination is better now, so we're using that preferentially. There is the There's also a version of monoclonal antibodies come from a company called Regeneron that has 2 other agents in it. That was what President Trump received when he got sick with COVID-19. And that one appears to be effective. And the point is these combination of monoclonal antibodies seem to work better because they cover a broader array of possible, genetic variants. And but really, all that is to say, we're beginning to see the impact of variant viruses. We can see that people who have variants are less likely to benefit from the single product monoclonal antibodies. We can recover that by doing the doubles, but what happens in the future when there's more mutation? We'll have to have more products, right. Different products to cover those. And that's the battle that's constantly being fought, is that as the disease changes, we have to be able to pivot and to meet that challenge. And fortunately, we live in an age that is, scientifically advanced enough to be able to cause to be able to react in that way. If this had been 100 years ago, it'd be very, very bad because we did not have all this technology and scientific understanding to be able to respond the way we do now. So we're all lucky to be alive today.
You're not using it as much. What are some of the reasons for that? Obviously, your numbers have been down. Is there a preparation that people need to go through? I know at one point they were having to get approval from their doctor. You don't know beforehand you're going to be sick. You hope you're not. What needs to happen?
It still has to be ordered by a doctor, and we would like to be able to get it within a few days. We can be given up to 10 days from the start of the illness. But I think probably the bottom line issue is just awareness. People who get sick need to get diagnosed as quickly as possible and contact their doctors for advice, even if they're feeling basically okay. We want to administer this to people who have minimal symptoms. The less symptoms, the better. Because as symptoms advance, then there's a corresponding declining ability for this to work. And the reason for that is that we know that there are different phases to the illness. There's the initial viral illness, which can be quite mild, but then that triggers an immune system, a runaway immune system reaction that is not dependent, at a certain point becomes not dependent any longer on the viral illness. And it's basically a whole different thing. And so the monoclonal antibodies will control the viral illness, but can do nothing about that second phase that gets triggered. And so if we give it early enough before that triggering happens, that's when you get the benefit of it. So people just need to be aware, but I think there's a built-in, sort of a built-in obstacle to getting to it, because if I come down with COVID-19 today, maybe I'm just going to have a headache and not feel great, but just feel like I've got a cold or a bad cold, or my allergies are acting up. And it may take me a while to realize that this is not right and I need to do something, but by then you get past the point in time where the treatment's going to have the most benefit.
Yeah,
so I think
that's the dilemma, because you're asking somebody to take this with mild symptoms, and you can't predict how the disease will progress. So, you're right. It's human nature to think, well, this is just going to be nothing more than a headache. I'm sure I'll get through this. And
absolutely. And people can have other concerns. This is some new thing. It probably costs $1 gazillion, and how's it get paid for? You have questions. You don't understand how it works. Fortunately, it has been dramatically simplified by the federal government. It is provided free from the federal government through the state. The product is when we administer it, we are required to bill insurance, but we don't turn around and bill the patient unless their insurance requires that. There can be some little complications, but for the most people who qualify for it, these are people who maybe are on Medicare and stuff. There's virtually no cost to anybody in that circumstance. there's not even a copay or a deductible to be paid. You just come get the treatment, and it is all, we take care of it all in the background by the mechanisms set up by the federal government and the state. So, but that's the common question, how am I supposed to pay for this?
Right.
So we have to kind of go through those steps of answering people's questions. Okay, what is this about? How does it work? What are the risks to me? How does it get paid for? And all that takes time. And I think what's that's kind of the hindrance to getting enough people plugged in, is that we can't get through that process quickly enough in a lot of cases.
So the ideal patient you're looking for would be an elderly patient with early COVID symptoms.
Absolutely.
So I think probably the message for the audience is, if you feel mildly ill, you're suspicious of COVID, you go and get tested, then you should consider monoclonal antibody therapy. There's no downside.
Yeah, there's really not a downside. We theoretically, obviously, when you're giving, it's an IV medication. When you're giving any medication, there can be reactions and so forth. We have not really seen any significant reactions at all. There have been 1 or 2 people who developed a rash a few days afterwards. It's unclear whether that's even related to the infusion, but we reported it as we're supposed to do. But as far as severe reactions like anaphylaxis and so forth, it's just been super uneventful. And everybody has really tolerated it well, especially those who are most at risk, who are older, have chronic medical problems. Just no issues with any of those folks having gotten the product. And just anecdotally, I think our numbers are probably too small to come up with any statistically meaningful results, but we have very few, amongst those people who get treated, very few of them have needed to go to the emergency room or needed to be hospitalized. I think there might have been we've done about 450 transfusions, and maybe one person after that had to be hospitalized. So, and these are all people who are at high risk. You have to be in a high-risk category to qualify under the emergency use authorization. So we feel like we've gotten very good results from it. We just wish more people would take advantage of it. Even now, when the new case numbers are low, there are still, more people who qualify for it than are taking advantage of it.
You're watching Ask the Doctors on Whitewater Community Television's WGTV Channel 11. We are taking your questions on our Facebook page. You can send a question via Twitter at WCTV Info. Last thing I'm going to ask before I go, at one point, and it's been a couple of months, the blood supply, as I was hearing it, was low. Can either of you talk about where we stand with that right now?
I do not have numbers at the tip at my fingertips as we sit here, but they are better. Still, they could be better yet, and they've improved some. We're not having. At one point, we were, we kind of know at what rate we tend to use blood products for various purposes, and we would only have available to us enough to get through a day or two. We're beyond that now, but we still want to have more blood donation done. That's just better for the community. We are, our blood bank is the Community Blood Center in Dayton. There have been extra blood donation drives in the area, and I think there's one tomorrow at Reed, actually.
Oh.
Probably should have brought information on that, but if you check donortime.org, you can find out where the local blood drives are, and there is one tomorrow morning.
Okay. We don't have that,
I'm signed up for it, actually.
We do have information that blood is needed.
Blood is always needed, and it's still needed in these COVID-19 times, and they're still looking for the plasma donors for the convalescent plasma project to provide high titer COVID-19 antibody plasma for actively sick patients in the hospital.
And just in case you aren't able to make the blood drive tomorrow, there is one Friday at Seton Catholic High School, not today, but a week from today. So you could sign up to do that. There's a phone number there on the screen, 965-6956, in Blakely at SetonCatholics.org if you want to send an email. Masks are required, and that's taking place next Friday between 10 and 2. So just some information there. Okay. You're watching Ask the Doctors on WGTV Channel 11, WCTV Channel 21, streaming on Facebook Live. We are taking your questions on our Facebook page as well as on Twitter at WCTV Info. The voice in my head says start to get to questions. We are backing up. We have plenty of them. So let's get to the first one. I'll stop asking questions of my own. Are there any vaccines currently using the mRNA technology other than the COVID vaccines?
I don't think that there are. I know that there have been some others under development. And really where they started was trying to find a new type of vaccine technology that could actually be used to help treat cancer of all things, because cancer cells elaborate different antigens on the cell surface. That's how they, in the case of breast cancer, as an example, they take those tissues and have them specially examined for what antigens are being exhibited on the cell surface, because then they can tell what mutations are present in the DNA in those cancer cells. And from that has come the idea of, well, could we actually immunize people against certain types of cancer? And that's where a lot of the active research has been, using this mRNA technology. So someone will probably prove me wrong. I'm just not aware of any others. I think that these two vaccines, the Pfizer and the Moderna, are the first two marketed vaccines using the mRNA technology, is my understanding.
Okay. Let's keep going. Is at-home COVID testing available?
It is. There are some tests out there. I think, though, you have to be careful that you're, because this is an area that is prone to scammers. Some scammers have tried to market, quote-unquote, home COVID-19 tests that don't actually do anything and just simply take people's money. So you have to be really careful, and you have to look for a reputable one. I think there is one of the pharmacy companies, it might be CVS, has a version that can actually be done at home. And there are some others. I can't name them right here, but you have to be careful.
Okay. Let's try to get another one in. Early on, I heard a lot about contact tracing, but I don't hear much about it anymore. Is contact tracing still going on?
Yes, it is. It looked like we would be totally overwhelmed with the numbers during the winter, but yes, every time we find a case, and this is all done locally and also with the help of the Indiana Department of Health, those people are contacted. We ask for their contacts, and we try to isolate these people for a 2-week period in order to slow down the spread of the virus.
Okay. Next question. We're just going to tear through a few of these. Are you seeing any evidence that obtaining the COVID vaccine could help relieve symptoms for long haulers still suffering? Some people think if they had COVID at any time that they don't need the vaccine, but could it unknowingly improve the health of even those who had a mild case?
Well, I think
we're going to leave that one up there for a little bit.
Yeah, it's kind of a two-parter. I think there is evidence. It's been anecdotal. I haven't seen any big studies, but people who have suffered from long-term symptoms, the so-called long haulers, sorry about that, that was an emergency phone call. The so-called long haulers have noticed dramatic improvement in their symptoms. Now, in terms of people who have had COVID and feeling they don't need the vaccine, typically a vaccine gives you a much more vigorous immune response than the natural infection. One of the things you have to think about, when you get infected with COVID, you may have a really severe or really high viral load that you inhale, and you may be really ill, and you may have a really pretty robust immune response. There's evidence that milder cases don't have as much immune response. So I would advise anyone who's had COVID to go ahead and get the vaccine. But this is true of other diseases too. It's been shown repeatedly that a vaccine will give you a better immune response and therefore better long-term protection than the naturally occurring disease that you contact.
As far as the vaccines helping people with so-called long COVID syndrome, right now what we have is some anecdotal reports, but there could be something there because it's one or two places in bigger cities with where they have centers. They've developed centers for these people to go, and they're saying we think that there might be something to this. They're starting up studies now to really look if this is true. But it seems to be, just based on what I've read in the media, people who have particularly severe fatigue, muscle pain, who seem to get some benefit. About 30% of them maybe get some benefit from vaccination. And it's a little bit of a mystery about why that should be. We can only speculate about that at this point. But there are other symptoms that fall into this spectrum of long haul syndrome, and so I think maybe it's just a portion of people, and there are other problems, like say with a little bit longer lasting heart inflammation. I don't know about any of that, but it's a particular set of symptoms within that complex that some people report they feel better. We'll see what the studies show. There was also kind of baked into the question is in that question was, do people who've previously had COVID-19 really need to be vaccinated? And to Dr. Jetmore with the point, they really should, and I agree with that. There was a study just a couple weeks ago published in the New England Journal of Medicine that looked at every COVID case in Denmark. You know, a smaller country where they have more centralized process on this and they have access to all the data, but still it was 4 million cases for all of Denmark up until like February of this year. And basically what and they looked at symptoms, they looked at whether people got second cases, had another bout with COVID-19, and they also looked at antibody levels and in some people. And basically what it seems to indicate is that people who've had active COVID-19 actually stay immune, have lower rates of reinfection, have very low rates of reinfection that last a very long time. For the whole duration of what the study was, they found very few people who'd previously been infected who got reinfected, but there were some. And particularly in folks who were older, were a little bit more likely to be susceptible to reinfection with COVID-19 later. And then also, you know, they had started immunization, and so they're baking in some analysis of what impact does immunization have on this. And what it looks like from their data is that having COVID-19 once is probably about like getting one shot of Pfizer or Moderna in terms of the immunogenicity, the immune level that you achieve, and that getting vaccinated after that gets you up to the same level that you would have after 2 shots of Pfizer or Moderna. So all that is a long way of arguing that yes, if you've had COVID-19, you should still get immunized because you can probably get your immunity up a lot higher if you do. And we have noticed from the start with immunization that people who had COVID-19 before seem to have a little bit more likelihood of getting side effects from the shot, you know, sort of feeling achy and tired and maybe have a fever afterwards and that kind of thing. Then that's all anecdotal. We haven't really measured that. But it would go along with this idea that people who've previously had COVID-19 essentially had that is essentially a prior or a first step immunization like effect, and that getting the vaccine afterwards kind of further amplifies that.
Dr. Thomas Huth, Vice President, Medical Affairs, Reed Health. Dr. David Jetmore, Wayne County Health Officer. Shortened title. Our doctors on Ask the
You could add
Doctor.
cowboy philosopher in there.
Yes,
Wayne
that
County
too.
Health Officer and cowboy philosopher.
They're taking your questions on our Facebook page as well as on Twitter at WCTV Info. They're here every Friday, 2 o'clock. We appreciate you being here. Curiosity, we got a vaccine. We have 3 now, but we got a vaccine long before we maybe thought we were going to have one. It's still under an emergency use authorization.
Right.
What is the timeline that we should be expecting the emergency use authorization drops off and it just becomes a fully authorized vaccine? Are we another 6 months from that? Are we another 5 years from that? It normally takes a long period of time for that to happen. You will have vaccinated a lot of people by the time you get that.
I'll let Tom answer the brunt of this question, but if you think about, the clinical trials that vaccines do to see if there's going to be any problems, we've had a clinical trial of over 30 million people for these vaccines. So no reported deaths, very few side effects. So, but there are certain bureaucratic hurdles hoops that these drugs need to jump through in order to change the emergency status into a regular. And I don't know about that. Maybe Dr. Huth can fill us in.
I heard Dr. Fauci say he thought it would be a couple of years, but then we were all saying it'd be a couple of years before we saw any vaccine, so maybe it'll be quicker than that. I think the information that the FDA will want for, for the standard approval is just going to be different than what they needed for the emergency use authorization. And that they'll want more robust data, answer several particular questions like, what's its safety in pregnant women or lactating women? Those are studies that are ongoing now. But, or what about children of younger ages? Pfizer actually in their phase 3 studies included children down to age 12. It's just that there weren't very many under age 16. So that's why the FDA approved Pfizer down to age 16. And in case of Moderna, they didn't include anybody under age 18, so that's why the approval was for 18 above. So what happened, where we are now is that Pfizer already had a head start on the under age 16 group. They added to that, and this week released the results of that, and it's very good. And so they're filing for revision of the emergency use authorization to take the Pfizer down to age 12, and I predict that we'll see that happen in the next couple of weeks. And then, but that's not all the way to standard approval. And I guess what I'm saying is I think there'll be a series of adjustments to the conditions of the emergency use authorization over time. And then at some point when the vaccine makers have submitted all the standard evidence with all the bigger studies and answered all the questions, that answer all the questions that the FDA has, then we'll see the standard approval. But there's something else that could happen in the meantime that would affect all this, and that is that the public health emergency declaration could expire, or it could be ended. It's, the emergency use authorization is an authority that the FDA has only in the context of a properly declared public health emergency, which we are in right now and has not yet ended. And I think there is an expiration date to it, and they've extended it. They've already extended it some. But theoretically, if that declaration ends because there's such minimal disease in the country, then theoretically, the vaccines become no longer approved at all and can't be given.
Really?
I don't think they're going to let that happen.
Okay.
So one of two things will either happen. Either they'll expedite the standard approval process to get it done in time, or they'll extend the public health emergency until they're to the point of being comfortable with giving standard approval. And so there are a lot of moving parts in all of this. But I think if we were just following the normal bureaucratic processes, it would take another couple of years or more to get the standard approval. I don't think it will be that long. And for the reasons I mentioned, they've got this, they're going to get in this time squeeze with the public health emergency declaration expiring, but they won't want to end the vaccinations, so they'll speed it up.
Okay. I'm not going to ask any more questions because the answers get scary. Facebook or Twitter for your questions for our doctors. Let's get the next one up. Should those who've had COVID eventually get a heart or lung scan or an exam from a physician to see if there's any hidden damage that isn't apparent after a mild case of COVID?
That is not the standard. That is not the recommendation now from the CDC or the FDA or any the professional groups, at least not that I've seen. There was a study recently in, I think it was released in JAMA, of looking at all of the data from 2020 of professional athletes. You know, all the professional athletes were enrolled in a study to look at their rates of COVID-19, and if they got it, then they had standardized testing and evaluation that was done over time, and they had certain triggers for, they had like non-invasive tests, echocardiograms or maybe stress tests and EKGs and the like, that that it was set up in a stepwise fashion that depending on whether there were any abnormalities, then they would have additional testing. And the last stage of testing was a cardiac magnetic resonance scans that would tell more about the metabolic activity of the heart tissue. And basically, when you boil it all down, they had several thousand athletes from all the professional sports: baseball, football, hockey, Major League Soccer was in there, and that their records were reviewed. And out of several thousand cases of COVID-19, there were like exactly 3 who actually had abnormalities on the cardiac magnetic resonance imaging that detected inflammation either in the heart muscle or in the pericardium, which is a membrane that surrounds the heart. And that was all done within like 3 months of the initial illness, I think was the time frame. Bottom line is the rates of significantly identifiable cardiac abnormalities in these professional athletes was quite low. And so I think when you get right down to it, the possibility of a cardiac issue, structural issue with the heart muscle or the pericardium it's real, it's there, it can happen, but it looks like it's actually a pretty rare thing. So I think, everybody who has it has to analyze their own situation. If they have a history of heart problems and they're worried about it, ask the doctor. But I think that is not a standard thing to look into. It's not a standard recommended evaluation process at this point.
Would you consider our condition and our hearts the same as a professional athlete? Can you compare those two things and say they're equal?
That's what, you have a point. But I think if there were significant issues with the professional athletes, then we'd be a lot more worried about people, who are couch potatoes like me. And
yes,
I'm not a couch potato, but I'm also not a professional athlete. So I think it's reassuring with these young folks who are in good health and high state of physical fitness. So it's somewhat reassuring that there's probably not so much of a problem with the older folks either. But again, every person has to assess this for themselves, and if any questions, talk to the doctor.
Okay. We appreciate you tuning in today on Ask the Doctors on WGTV, WCTV, and on our Facebook page. At this point in our show, we normally turn back to Dr. Huth, and he takes us through some numbers that he has. Things look a little bit different this week.
Yeah, I've got kind of a heavy data load for you, which I
yes, you do. So we're going to start a little bit earlier.
Won't belabor too much. If you look at the first page there, just stay zoomed out. Actually, that shows both sides at once if you can.
There's only singles, so he's not going to be able to double those.
Oh, okay. That's fine. So this is the Wayne County statistics. You can see for the last few weeks, these are weekly numbers. It's actually been kind of flat. I'm predicting this week it will be around 42, maybe as high as about 68, which would actually be a slight increase if it's that high. But I think 42 is a likelier number. Anyway, from this and probably the next one you're going to show is the read numbers that also have this downward trajectory. You could argue that, oh, things are continuing to get better, so, hey, fortunately the mask mandate is going, we're getting back to normal, yay. But the problem is after this, what I've brought is data from the world, the U.S. and the state to kind of show you what my level of concern is. On the left is the world case counts. We can see that for the last 6 weeks or so, the world has been on a steady uptrend. It's mainly in Europe and the Eastern Mediterranean, like Turkey and Yugoslavia, and places in that part of the world, but also in the U.S., which is the right side. In the last 2 weeks, we can see that there's a slight uptrend in the U.S. numbers, and it was actually this appearance that led the current CDC director to say this week on different interview shows that she has a feeling of impending doom, and that's the scare quoted phrase that gets into all the headlines, that we're on the cusp of another upswing in the U.S. And that's, that could well be the case. So go on to the next bit, which will be zoning in on Indiana, and up in the upper left-hand corner, these are the actual Indiana case counts, and we can see that Indiana, too, has had a slight upswing in the last couple of 3 weeks. I've added trend lines to that to kind of highlight that. Below that graph is the positivity rate, which is also on the upswing. And not dramatically, but it is significantly, it is a definite change in the prior trend, which was down. Now, the right-hand graph on that page is a comparison of different states with the U.S. average. The U.S. average is the third one from the left, of the 7-day case rate per 100,000 population, which would normalize things across states. So the cases per 100,000 population, Indiana and Ohio are below the U.S. average. But I would note that despite that, the U.S. average increased about 14% in the last 10 days, and Indiana, it increased 21%, even though it's still low. We've actually had a higher increase in the case rate per 100,000 than the U.S. average. Ohio, similarly, 23%. And we can see the other states on the right-hand part of the graph where they've actually had very significant, there's the highest case rates in the U.S., and they've all had significant increases. And I point out particularly in Michigan, which actually is about a 45% increase, or almost doubling, I should say. It almost doubles. So it's nearly 100% increase in the case rates per 100,000 population. So then there should be one more page on there, I think, Ryan, which is, again, looking at all the counties surrounding us. And the green bars are the Indiana counties. The blue are the adjacent Ohio counties, are purple and dark. And they're arrayed from low to high in vaccination rates. And so the other side of the equation, obviously, Eric, is that, okay, if case counts are going up, what are we doing about vaccination to try to mitigate that? Mm-hmm. Well, we have in Wayne County, which is the third bar from the right, is actually the best performing in this part of the state, in this region. But we're at about 25, 26%, 28%, 26%. And you can see the change over time, over the last 4 weeks. And what I brought this to show that we're not increasing our vaccination at really in the way that I would like to see. You take the spread over the 4 weeks to say, look at Ohio, which is right next to the Indiana bar. You can see that there's a much bigger spread in the rate of increase of vaccination rates in Ohio, as an example, or the U.S. overall. We're not increasing at a rate consequent or like what even Indiana is, or Ohio, or the U.S., and that bothers me a little bit.
We're creeping up 1% or 2% a week. They're increasing 3-4%
Exactly.
a week.
What do you attribute that to? Do you think it's reluctance of the people in these younger age groups to be vaccinated?
I don't know what else it could be. I mean, to me, the three legs of the stool of vaccination are supply of that vaccine, access to the vaccine, which we've got lots of supply, and I've got access out the wazoo, lots of appointments. We're doing pods everywhere. Your clinic is doing extra clinics. We're doing some things with pop-up vaccination possibilities. Yeah, we've got lots of access. The third stool is vaccine adoption by people, and that is lacking compared to the county. We're doing better than the counties surrounding us, don't get me wrong, but we could be doing a lot better if you use the U.S. and other states as benchmarks. And that bothers me, that at this rate, what will happen is over the next few weeks, we will fall behind. We will move farther down the list to the left. And I don't want to see that, so I'm racking my brains about how to get more people out there to be vaccinated.
Okay. We're about 6 minutes or so till the end of the show. We're going to try to get 1 or 2 more questions in during that time frame. So, do I have to be an Indiana resident to get vaccinated in Wayne County?
You do not. With a proviso.
Okay.
You do need to work in Indiana. That has been relaxed a little bit. You need to work or be a student in Indiana, theoretically, but we've actually relaxed the validation requirements. You know, basically, our approach is, and I heard Dr. Weaver on a call this week say, don't worry about checking people's credentials or whatever. If they're on your schedule, just vaccinate them. That's always been our approach. We've never really called anybody out for, are you really, an Indiana resident? So, and being on the border like this, we've got lots of people who live in Ohio, work in Indiana, and such, and there was a short period of time where the state was telling us, don't even vaccinate them. But all that's gone now. We have lots of vaccine in the state. We have lots of vaccine in this area. I just want to get it in people's arms. And if you can attest, when you sign up, you do have an attestation about whether you, work in Indiana. As long as you can check that positive, that it's true. You can be vaccinated at our clinic at any rate. And,
I was going to ask,
I'm
is
sure
that the same where you
Yeah,
are, or
it's
as the health clinic for
health
Wayne
department's
County,
clinic as well?
are your restrictions a little stronger?
No, they're the same as the one. It's the same recommendation that we get from the state, which is where we get our vaccine.
Okay.
Initially, I think we were vaccinating anyone that had a shoulder, and then the state had limited vaccine, and the state said no, we're not going to do any more Ohio residents. But that's been relaxed, and that's a good thing for us because, like Tom said, we're a border county. Richmond is one of the main cities for Western Ohio people in this part of the world. So I have the same feeling Tom does. I want to get vaccine in arms. The more people we can vaccinate, the safer we'll all be.
Okay.
And the graphs we were showing, you don't have to put those back up, but if you looked at that closely, you would notice that prevalent dark counties lag the state of Ohio, and they lag even us. So they're at the left-hand part of the spectrum there, and we'd like to help those counties get vaccinated up, but we can't take our vaccine there. But I think anybody who lives in those counties and works or goes to school in Indiana definitely take advantage of our access if they're having trouble getting it there.
Okay. Before we get out, Ryan, if you could put the slide up that you had one more time with the information on where you can get some help. 16 and older, you can do it ourshot.in.gov if you need some assistance. Wayne County Health Department, their phone number is there, 973-9245. Reed Health Vaccine Hotline, their number is there, 935-8484. Morrison Reeves Library has been helping people make appointments, and Life Stream Services has also been helping set up, I think, some homebound Hoosiers shots. If you're homebound needing a shot, you can do
I should
that.
point out, Eric, that for 16 and 17-year-olds, your only option really is Pfizer at the Kuhlman Center, so keep that in mind.
Yeah, and we basically have Moderna vaccine. So people, these young people, as Tom said, if you're 17, you need to have the Pfizer vaccine.
Okay. And a couple of things I want to remind you of. Reed Health Vaccine Clinic is still at the Coleman Center, Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 5 p.m., Saturday, 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. And again, vaccines are also available for 16 and up. And also want to remind you about a special show that we're going to have this week on WETV. It is Let's Talk. It is the final Let's Talk for this year. The topic is domestic violence and abuse. That show will be on at 7 p.m. and also streaming on Facebook. So you might want to check that out. Repeat that for me, please. Okay. Need to thank our doctors. Dr. Thomas Huth, Vice President, Medical Affairs, Reed Health, also able to be seen at 5 p.m. Wednesdays, WHIO TV.
Correct.
Look for him on LinkedIn, Twitter, and he's just out there passing out some information. So if you're looking for information, this is definitely a place to go. Wayne County Health Department is also providing lots of information with their testing site at the Elder Bierman location, as well as their COVID-19 vaccines. So Dr. David Jetmore, sir, thank you. To both of you, enjoy the weekend. I hope you have a great one.
We will.
You too.
Okay. Thank you very much for watching this week's Ask the Doctors on Whitewater Community Television's WGTV Channel 11. If you missed this program, you will be able to find it running throughout the week, as well as on our video on demand site. Thanks for watching. As always, I wish you well. Have a blessed Easter.